organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Welcome to United Front Radio. We're exploring the ideas that once made America great and how we can implement them again today. This is Daniela Walls, chair of the Tax Wall Street Party, and Kyle McCarthy, founding member of the United Front Against Austerity.
I think we've been developing the idea that there's a pattern here, and it comes from a source. And I think maybe today we should get more deeply into what that source is and try to get at the point of what is this all about on a deeper level. And maybe, before we do that, I don't know, let's take a time out and sort of give a little commercial for our friend Dan Burdorf, who's running for the U.S. Senate in Nebraska. Do you want to do that?
Yeah. If we could take that time out really quickly and have everybody go to danfornebraska.com, and volunteer, donate if you can. If you happen to be in the Nebraska area, come out and petition with us because we desperately need petitioners, and we need to turn in 6,000 signatures by August 1st. I'm flying to Nebraska next week. The next couple episodes Kyle's going to do with a guest host. All our efforts are on the ground in Nebraska right now. Read Dan's platform, watch his campaign commercials, look at what a New Deal candidate looks like. Is there any words you want to say about Dan?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people have a defeatist attitude about politics, like especially when you get into this realm of truthers and conspiracy theorists and stuff. Like we've been doing, you go through the information, it's all kind of interesting, and at the end of the day, you throw your hands in the air and say you're doomed, but it's just, this is what you can do. It's not quixotic to be throwing your hat into the political arena and doing this kind of grueling work that we have to give Dan credit, who's for months has been on the ground every day collecting signatures at DMVs and trying to get out there and meet with people, making alliances, spreading the message. It's unfortunately that is how you turn the whole ship around. It's just really hard, unglamorous work that, may not pay off in the short term, and you just have to keep doing it, and that sort of the seeds that you plant are going to grow in the future, maybe after you're gone, or hopefully sooner than that.
The population of Nebraska is 1.5 million, which isn't that large. And if Dan's coming into contact with, let's say, 10,000 people standing out on the street, even if he isn't elected, when the candidate who is elected, one of the two establishment candidates, ends up disappointing the people, those people will remember that Dan was standing outside and think, I should have voted for that guy. Or they'll remember his platform, or even go back to his platform and check him out. These things grow. As time goes on, what's truthful and what's honest and what's real remains. Third parties spring up when neither major party is addressing a certain issue. Like when neither major party was addressing slavery, I think it was I forget the name of the party. It was the Dirt Party, or I'll have to look it up.
The Free Soil Party?
Yeah, or something like that, right. One of their main issues was slavery. When neither major party was addressing women's right to vote, women's rights, then there was a National Women's Party. So when neither major party is tackling a giant issue, anti-war parties have sprung up.
One of the most interesting ones is John Quincy Adams, who is an excellent, excellent figure in American history. If you want to read about a guy who exemplifies the American system of political economy and also is just in every respect just an interesting and sort of heroic figure, look that guy up. But after he had already been president, he ran again. But he created a party called the Anti-Masonic Party to basically expose the fact that both of his competitors were Freemasons. But he was the lawyer that represented the slaves in the Amistad case. He, on every count, was a great guy. And maybe this sort of leads into what we wanted to talk about today. But really, individuals can change history.
Yes.
Because the conspiracy that you're up against is not monolithic. It doesn't involve that many people. Not that many people are really in on this sort of secret. Even the Republican and Democratic establishment, not all of them understand the MO of Wall Street. A lot of those guys are just career politicians who are going to come and go. And there are very few people who are really controlling the show. It's a lot like the Wizard of Oz or something. And I think, we can get into that, and it's going to help explain a lot of what we've been trying to talk about these last couple of weeks.
Well, I think that also media and alternative media are to blame for turning this more into more like a shadowy overlord, or
making it like supernatural. With
supernatural that it can't be penetrated. We're effectively penetrating the system with only a handful of people here.
Mm-hmm.
And very little money. We're talking about no more than a couple $1,000s, and a handful of people are going to be able to probably get Dan on the ballot for U.S. Senate. Mm-hmm. What could we do with 50 people and maybe $10,000? You know what I'm saying?
Take a mini Ross Perot in every community. Like, is there some sort of a retired engineer or industrialist and run for U.S. Congress? Get behind the right program. And like we said before, that's the real difference here, is that the Green Party never makes a dent because they don't have the right program. The Libertarians never make a dent because they don't have the right program. It's not just that the whole world is against you because you're a third party. It's just you've really got to be saying something that people are going to care about.
America is inherently a New Deal society. The alternative news and the mainstream news would make it out to be that it's inherently an Occupy socialist anarchistic society or a libertarian Austrian School of Economics free market society on the other hand. We're not. The majority of the population of America is New Deal.
Go down to Walmart and just find a random person and say, all right, pick one of the following. You can have radical feminism and environmentalism, which is the Green Party. You can have total free trade, no social security, whatever, no post office, which is the Libertarians. Or right down the middle, let's protect our industries and family farms. Let's create high-wage jobs. Let's build infrastructure and give you a union. What is the person going to go for? Nobody wants this fringe stuff except for these sort of petty bourgeois people who don't have really families and, other things to care about that most people have.
Today we are going to get into the distinction between the cult of Dionysus and the cult of Apollo. In their view of life, the American people are predominantly Apollonian. Okay.
What we're talking about in Greek mythology, Apollo and Dionysus are brothers. Mm-hmm. And Apollo is the god of the sun. He's sort of associated with reason, moderation. Dionysus is the god of partying and acting wild. He's riding around naked on a leopard.
The god of drunkenness versus the god of order.
In Greece, there was a literal, a cult of Apollo at Delphi, and that was the oligarchs of that society. And then there were various Dionysian cults, cult being sort of like a culture, like an artificial culture. So that could have been the Eleusinian Mysteries, that was sort of like a drug cult where people were all put on psychedelics and, marched through this town. And there are all these like mystery initiation cults. And then up to the modern times, a Dionysian cult would be anything from like Woodstock and Burning Man and Occupy to, I would argue, even things like the Libertarians are cult. They would say they're an Apollonian cult because they're all about reason, but really they're all about the free market, these sort of obsessive, hedonistic things.
Occupy would be Dionysian. It was a tribal gathering based more on immediate emotional response rather than order or planned execution of structured, methodical demands based on our economic reality. On the ground, it was fueled more by emotion than reason. If it were Apollonian, then it would have had a leader who stood by an agreed-upon list of well-constructed demands. It became less of a traditional protest and more of a tribal gathering, which in the end looked more like Woodstock than a working-class protest. A good historical representation of Apollo versus Dionysus is 1969. You had on the one hand the Apollo moon landing, and you also had the Woodstock Festival. The Apollo moon landing represented science and progress, and Woodstock represented primeval, like the primeval emotions covered in mud. Like, this is the representation. Like, this is Apollo and Woodstock is Dionysian. The dichotomy here is reason on the one hand and emotion on the other hand. And the danger becomes when you mix Dionysian principles into your political proficiency. With reason, which is Apollonian, you have to take many different sides of an argument into account to make your conclusion. With Dionysus, you are mainly reacting based on your first impression or feeling. You're acting out of your emotion instead of your intellect.
You know, you look again at these movements and the thing that makes them work for the benefit of the elite is that they don't touch what gives the elite power, which is their control of finance, their control of trade, their control of technology.
The catch-22 is that people believe that they're rebelling when the ruling class is like promoting a mythology.
Right.
I just want to read, this is a long quote. It's a really long quote, so get a cup of tea. You can take this time for a tea break. But I think it's very important enough to take this amount of time. Okay, global conspiracies which function succeed by establishing controlled environments around the minds of the credulous masses of the world. Such a controlled environment is summed up efficiently by stating that the credulous masses are ruled by mythologies, and that the elites rule such masses by creating, shaping, and manipulating the mythologies. The methods employed by Joseph Goebbels and carried further by British intelligence networks for creating and manipulating the mythologies of credulous masses through the control of all or at least key portions of the press and radio and television are the center of modern techniques to this effect. Outside and above the foolish folk who rely upon the Washington Post, New York Times, London Times, or on popular women's magazines, and so on and so forth, there is indeed a governing elite. This elite does possess secret knowledge. The first aspect of this special knowledge is that the elite not only know that the mythologies are mythologies, but also know that they themselves create and use those mythologies to manipulate the credulous masses. One elite, the humanists, the Platonic or Neoplatonic faction, is dedicated to steering the course of history away from rule through mythologies. The other, the Aristotelians and their heirs, is committed to strengthening the rule by mythology for the purpose of establishing a permanent, feudal-like utopia of abundant, simple-minded folk ruled by a tenured neo-Aristotelian oligarchy. And that's what we were saying last week, is that we're not moving toward fascism. Currently, we're moving toward neo-feudalism, fueled by mythologies.
In feudalism sort of being typified by low levels of industrial development, no sort of ownership of property or production by the masses, sort of arbitrary government based on market strength rather than based on representation.
Something like we were talking about Burning Man and also Occupy. Burning Man's not just a concert, but it's a tribal gathering. Something like Occupy or Woodstock wasn't just a protest or a concert, but it was a tribal gathering that proclaimed to herald the new culture. Mm-hmm. And this new culture is defined by several things, including sharing. You can exist without things like sanitary facilities. Not trying to be funny. You were saying, is a 3D printer going to build a sewer? The mythology you were being sold by the Aristotelian elite, this current mythology, is that what happened at Occupy, or for instance, what happened at Woodstock, or what happens at Burning Man, is part of our evolution. Our evolution is not new power production or new technologies or new industry. That our evolution is communal culture of sharing and non-materialism.
Yeah, and I mean, you can get into a lot of different things, like the After Party, which is this supposed new political party that doesn't have any candidates. It's sort of the same thing, where it's this is Occupy's attempt at a political party, and what is their plan? Urban gardens. Among their top 4 demands, one of them is indigenous rights. Mm-hmm. There's nothing, whatever. That's great. Indigenous people should have rights, but they should have the right to economic development, and not just the right to have a powwow and have a bunch of white people think they're sacred. It's just
what strikes me about all of the demands for the After Party, and even the demands that were going around during Occupy, is how myopic and small scale they are. Who pays for the Love Fest, the planes and cars to get you to Burning Man, the food that everybody had to eat. Do you know what I mean? Where was that coming from? I heard a joke that said, apparently unloved ones have to pay. Without help or infrastructure, there's none of this indigenous rights. These are luxury platform items, and we are not living in luxury times. We're currently in the middle of a depression.
I mean, this might, I don't know if this is too deep of a rabbit hole to get into, but you were talking in that quote about basically the inner elite creates and is aware of mythologies, and they promulgate these mythologies and use them to their ends. It can also be said, though, that the Platonic elite has their own mythologies, and in some way there's like a war of mythologies that takes place that tries to shape people in one direction or another. I mean, I don't really want to get into that with religion. It's sort of a messy subject, but we've both been listening to David Livingstone lately. He's a really interesting guy, and he's got a take on Plato that I just didn't see in my reading of Plato. Plato is sort of the apostle of logic and truth, whereas Aristotle is the apostle of rhetoric. Where you can read, like, Aristotle's got a whole set of works called On Rhetoric, where he basically just teaches you different ways to lie. Mm-hmm. And Plato basically, in like the dialogues and in the Republic and all that stuff, he just it's about sort of working through logical processes to like cast aside things that can't be true in order to arrive at things that must be true by process of elimination. One interesting thing that I found a while ago is Leo Strauss, who's the godfather of the neocons. One of the big things in his philosophy was in the dialogues, where he has a dialogue between Socrates and Thrasymachus, and the point of it is basically like, is strength equivalent to righteousness? Does pure ability to rule give you the right to rule? And in this thing, Plato basically takes apart Thrasymachus and shows that no, that's not the case. That can't be the case, and there's got to be some greater merit to the right to rule or whatever. Where Leo Strauss basically says that, oh no, Plato he's basically making this argument in a weak way because Plato himself is actually like a Kabbalist. He's like telling you the inversion of the truth. It's almost like Plato's whole work is just like this big softball that's going to be hit by people like Leo Strauss to show that indeed, sort of like Nietzsche, that whoever has the will to power is fit to rule. And that kind of stuff. I don't think that's actually the truth. I think that, unfortunately, is what some people interpret Plato as. They'll look at the Republic, it's sort of the same thing with Machiavelli, where in conspiracy culture, those figures have become synonymous with manipulation and with basically lying about your intentions. I don't think that's true at all, and that's not what people in a historical context would have thought of it.
You're cutting off a golden renaissance to issue in Jacobianism.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, with Machiavelli was the tutor to Lorenzo de Medici, and to whom he dedicated The Prince. And he's got The Prince, and then he's got his discourses. I think, again, taking into account the fact that there is this sort of inner elite of people trying to manipulate everyone else, you're not going to necessarily be able to defeat that inner elite who has their tentacles in and out of every institution. You're not going to be able to just come right in and say, hey, I'm Lorenzo de Medici, and here's what I'm going to do. Unfortunately, it's going to require some counter-conspiracy. That's not what we're doing. We're just out there saying, here's exactly what we want. I think that people look at something like that and say, ooh, Machiavelli, he's a bad guy. Well, what about the guys who he was opposing? It's the same sort of...
People don't dig that far into history, so nobody knows who Machiavelli was opposing.
It's the same thing with like Plato's Republic or like Thomas More's Utopia or something like that. But then Thomas More, he wanted like a communist utopia. Well, how about the fact that he was executed by Cromwell? Does Cromwell get off the hook? It's sort of just the same thing. It's like you have to look at the whole context, and unfortunately, this whole conspiracy theory world is full of this sort of one-sided thinking and just pulling factoids off the internet and not having the background to put them all into context. I mean,
Well, that gets into the Apollonian and Dionysian idea. An Apollonian perspective means reason, and reason takes all sides of an argument into account. Dionysian goes on emotion and takes one path. A sharp turn one way or a sharp turn the other way. Jumps to conclusions. What I think is needed more than ever right now in the alternative media research world is some Apollonian reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, sometimes you have to sort of go with your gut, but within the framework of reason where you sort of understand the basic ideas of these different topics. And I mean,
the ruling class is selling you mythologies. They're so cleverly sold to you that when you think you're rebelling, you're really playing right into their hands.
They just want you chasing your tail over the place. This is an issue that's going on right now, and like Rush Limbaugh is basically now adopting the guise of like an Alex Jones or something, where it's like, yeah, this is a big conspiracy and they're going to flood America with illegals. Mm-hmm. But like, why are they putting that out there?
My take on that entire thing is that that's a Koch brother-funded operation. Get the whole country angry as they see the illegals flooding over the border right in time for the midterm elections because they're running on a heavy anti-immigration policy platform. So it's just going to get more Koch-funded candidates into office. I think that that's a psyop.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, I think there are actually there are some people being brought into the country almost like as stage props.
Yeah, that's what I think. All of a sudden, right before the midterm elections, that's when we see people coming across the border, and it's on the news 24/7. Whenever you see stuff on the news, like we've always said, 24/7, you've got to ask yourself what's behind it. What's the larger goal here? Just going back for a second to what I was saying before about this idea that you believe you're rebelling if you're going through a process of personal enlightenment, let's call it, or so-called enlightenment, and people who go through this process believe that one enlightened person can change the world, and that's what they're selling you. They don't give the masses the tools to become successful Apollonian leaders. They're saying, okay, in lieu of your real power, we're going to let you go as far as you want to go in this new age spiritual stuff. But really, that's a dead end. Any enlightened person like a Gandhi or Martin Luther King who changed the world were also very educated, driven, goal-oriented, and focused, which are Apollonian qualities. They weren't just off with scattered minds doing drugs, running around to concerts.
They're bringing it to you as if, like, oh my God, I've just received this amazing revelation from the realm of ayahuasca. Hinduism. They're not calling it that, but that's all it is. And basically, it's just like, what is the result of Hinduism? The caste system. And you've got these just legions of people living in absolute filth. Not saying that's like all of modern India, but throughout much of history has been the result or the sort of coincident with Hindu ideology is just acceptance of a caste system for that reason, where it's just, well, you're just this ripple of infinite consciousness that happens to be catching rats by blowing smoke into a hole, you know?
Well, having like a nirvanic experience or a psychedelic experience does not make you a better person. That's one of the biggest myths ever sold. That if you go and you cloister yourself off as a Buddhist and you achieve nirvana through meditation, or you go and you take psychedelic drugs, that you are going to come back and be a better person. We'll have an experience. You might laugh a lot. You might free some personal issues up, but you will not come back into reality necessarily and do great works that are going to further the cause of humanity. I mean,
you might be compassionate in sort of this useless sense where it's like, I want to send my love vibrations out into the universe, man, where just, you know what I'm saying, where you're compassionate in this sort of universal sense that doesn't have any sort of practical application. It gets at the point of what is it really to be human? And that is not your Dionysian nature or your beast nature of passion and emotion. And, you know, bonobos have passion and emotion.
Exactly.
But what bonobos don't have is the ability to imagine something that doesn't exist and figure out how to make it happen.
Exactly. We were talking about that book that Charles Darwin wrote before, The Origin of Species. He talked about the thing that humans and animals have in common is they both have emotion.
And he probably used that for some race theory.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And, you know, one thing that I think a lot of, we probably have some libertarians or people of that persuasion out there, and I know that you and I have both sort of had our flirtation with libertarianism they kind of have this feeling that they have a monopoly on the idea of reason. You know, they even have Reason magazine, and if even just like the core of objectivism is basically like Apollonian thinking, where it's all about reason, take the emotions out of it. Why should that then have to lead into free market, laissez-faire capitalism and the gold standard? What does that have to do with reason? It's, in effect, it's like, I think this idea that we're talking about is very powerful, but for them, it's basically like, okay, we'll co-opt that idea and associate it a priori with these terrible ideas.
The libertarians have cornered the market on reason because the left-wing intellectuals are so Dionysian. The average American is common sense oriented and technology oriented, right? And then you get these left-wing intellectuals that come along with these Dionysian ideas that the mainstream intellectuals call the middle class goals materialistic or middle class, right? To be common sense oriented or technology oriented. They say, oh, it's middle class. And they do their work to prove Dionysian points.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, back to something like the after party, you're talking about indigenous rights, or like these people, their first base of operations is in Detroit, where they're basically, I would call it poverty pimping. They find poor African Americans and sort of associate with them. Mm-hmm. But it's not, the boldest demand might be like, turn the water back on. And that's great, yeah, please turn the water back on. That's what they're not demanding is any sort of an economic program to put people back to work. Because I think the idea is you, middle-class bourgeois white people, need to be brought down to this level of the proletariat, as opposed to let's lift everybody up so that everybody has some property they can pass on to their children. Everybody's got a job that they have some stake in because they're in a union or whatever it is. It's just the left wing is just so decadent in that way, where the whole idea is just feeling guilty for having an automobile or air conditioning and wanting to like lower yourself to the lowest common denominator.
You see a lot of people mobilize now to go out to Detroit and get the water turned on. But what happens in 6 months? What happens when the water gets turned on? What happens in a year from now? Where are their demands to put people back to work? Why aren't any of them getting at the root cause of anything?
You get on a lot of like comment forums on, or discussion threads on articles and stuff. Like a right-wing Limbaugh listener type will come in and say, well, the real problem is these damn unions, and Detroit doesn't know how to make a good car, and these people are lazy or whatever.
And then you'll get the left wing saying, oh, the problem is Wall Street, but not giving any practical solutions to regulate Wall Street. They're just saying, Wall Street did this to them.
They'll just say, shut up, you're uncaring or whatever. But shut up, man.
Well, I heard a few people say, oh, the problem's Wall Street, and then stop right there. Okay, right. Well, let's regulate Wall Street. Ban credit default swaps, set up a 15% reserve requirement for OTC derivatives, set a 10% maximum rate of interest on credit cards and payday loans, to restore state and federal anti-usury laws, ban adjustable rate mortgages, re-regulate commodity markets, restore individual Chapter 11, et cetera, et cetera. You don't see any of that. You just you'll hear, well, it's all Wall Street did this, okay?
And once again, all of those things are absolutely necessary, but that's like the triage where you're having to like put the genie back in the bottle. And I think what I want to get at is you need that no one offers is alternatives to Wall Street.
Right.
Where it was the same issue. I was reading an article today about Napoleon and the idea that he sort of accidentally brought usury back into France, or just thinking about this idea of like usury as an imposition upon people. Oh my God, usury, like it's just some monster that shows up. Usury is just something that fills a vacuum that's not being filled by something else. To give a practical example, a big part of Wall Street is the commodity futures market, which is in Chicago, where they've got like the board options exchange and I forget the name of the commodity exchange, where basically like agricultural futures will be sold there, where a farmer in March or April is going to sell his future production at a certain price. He's going to say, okay, I want to lock in corn at $6 or whatever. So, and then he grows his corn, and then at the end of the year, maybe corn is up to $8 a bushel. So it's the Wall Street trader gets the rest, and he gets the $6 or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's a push down system that basically the trader is always going to figure out a way to win by going long or short or whatever, and then the farmer's income erodes over time because he's fighting against the interests of Wall Street. The answer to that is not get rid of the commodity futures exchange, because then the farmer has no kind of insurance against price fluctuations and crop failures. And I think that's where, the right-wingers are always going to come in and say, this is in place because it's necessary for this reason or that reason. What the left wing, or whatever we call it, what this New Deal movement needs to come in with is, here is the alternative. And in that case, the alternative is the parity price, where we say the government is going to issue a loan guarantee more or less at the price of production. Parity is sort of complicated, but it's basically, if you took what would it cost to grow a bushel of corn under fair conditions, meaning we want it to be a reasonable acreage, we want the farmer to make a reasonable return on his product or whatever, that the government is just going to say, at the end of the year, we guarantee that we're going to pay parity. At the end of the year, what happens is that the grain elevator has to come in and pay that parity cost plus some small percentage to make sure that they've got a product to market. Mm-hmm. Just saying it's that practical kind of stuff. It's the same thing with the national bank. I hate the fact that that Wall Street is just screwing states on municipal bonds. There was something recently in California where Jerry Brown was trying to get some irrigation project passed, and it was that the interest on the bond was going to triple the price for taxpayers. It was, let's say it was $10 billion. The taxpayers over just, out of people's property taxes were going to pay $10 billion for irrigation and $20 billion for interest. Mm-hmm. The alternatives are not either get screwed by Wall Street or don't have fresh water. The alternative is use a national bank to finance that bond at 0%. So it costs $10 billion and you get the irrigation.
The problem is being politically active these days springs more from intuition than practical thinking.
And it's just the parameters of the debate are sort of, it's back to this idea of mythologies where you're sort of trapped within the walls of this mythology that these are the only two options you have.
Exactly.
The two options are Ayn Rand's version of Apollonian thinking, which is every man for himself,
right.
Laissez-faire economics, Wall Street uber alles, and then on the other side, you can be a Dionysian and go ride around naked on a leopard, or
or camp out in a park in your own filth. Just basically end civilization, like Derek Jensen would suggest,
or just complain.
I think why people are going to Detroit now for the water issue is because they can relate to that. Mm-hmm. It's like they can feel what it would be like not to have water, and that's driving them into action. I feel like the larger plot is so far removed from their instincts that it's hard to get their intellect around it. They're removed from how much Wall Street has its tentacles into our tangible life. Mm-hmm. All of our money is extracted second by second by Wall Street, and that's just, it's too large of a problem.
And not to say, obviously that's an important issue, the water shutoffs. You're talking about the potential for genocide and certainly the potential for people to be having a terrible quality of life and disease and all this kind of stuff because Detroit has been deindustrialized, the jobs are gone, and these poor people are hanging on for dear life, and mm-hmm. It's that's something that needs to be addressed. But
what needs to be addressed is how this doesn't spread to the rest of the country.
An example, to take a bourgeois example, it's something like property taxes. It's hard to get people's minds around. Like in Illinois, we've got this pension crisis, and those teachers are taking all of our money and blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. Leaving aside the fact that they fund their pensions out of their paychecks and they're not eligible for Social Security because of that pension. There are these things called the comprehensive annual financial reports. Certain people talk a lot about these things. I looked at the one for last year the other day. It's called the IMRF. It's the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, where all of the teachers and I believe probably cops and firefighters and stuff. There are probably a few different ones, but that's probably the biggest one. You can go through there and see that every year your tax dollars go to hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in broker fees, money manager fees, all this kind of stuff for these pension funds. Mm-hmm. On top of that, they're losing all the damn money in the derivatives market continually. I first checked in on that particular one back in 2009. It's just very weird. Like, why is it that I'm getting taxed thousands and thousands of dollars every year just to sit on this piece of property? And then instead of like putting that back into the community, like through a state bank or whatever, it's going to be used to siphon teachers' money away into the pockets of Wall Street brokers. It's just the whole thing. Like, that whole thing is obscene, but it's just like you're saying. It's like you need people to get up to a certain level of education where they can see that's a big problem, and the solution is we're going to put on a Wall Street sales tax to slow down the amount of speculation, and we're going to create a state and national banks to direct this credit where we want it to go. That just takes so long compared to something like the water issue, or, oh my God, there's a busload of illegals, stop the presses.
Because they can see that and touch it. You were saying that it took you a while to understand the idea of a national bank.
Yeah. Back even, I guess, in probably 2000 when Ralph Nader was talking about that in his campaign, or he was talking about the Federal Reserve to some extent, or you hear Ron Paul talking about it. It's like, you can understand, okay, yeah, that's Wall Street shouldn't control the Fed. We should control it. But it sort of conceptually, it took me a little bit to understand how it was supposed to function. And I think all that is I didn't have basic financial literacy about what a bond is. Mm-hmm. And anyone with that kind of understanding can much more quickly say, oh, okay, they know what credit is, and they can understand that credit doesn't have to come from existing reserves. It's basically an obligation to future ability to pay. But yeah, those kind of issues, like, people just really need to be more educated in terms of certain concepts, or they're going to not pay. I think it's just that once you start to really understand how all this stuff works, the program we're talking about becomes the only solution. And then you're going to start to say, oh, okay, I can see why corporate tax loopholes is not as important as nationalizing the Fed.
I mean, there's an underground movement to understand, get a cursory understanding of the law, so that if a cop pulls you over, that kind of moment, where it's like if a cop pulls you over, you don't have to answer his questions and this kind of stuff. Those people who are getting into,
people that go into courts and they're like, I am a capital letter, sir. And
no, I am not the capital Daniela Walls. I am the lowercase Daniela Walls. That
a free woman on the land.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least it's some start of people, though, trying to understand law. People need to do that a little bit with economics, because those things aren't so shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, because that's all just a bunch of crazy flim-flam about.
For every one person who,
like, oh my God, you've exposed us. We're under maritime law, sir. You're free to go now.
For every one person that's gotten out of court on the maritime law argument, 10,000 have gone to jail. People are interested in that, though. It's enticing to them because they feel that there's something personal at stake. So they go and study this kind of stuff.
Make an appeal to anybody listening who is sort of interested in the Austrian school or would call themselves a libertarian. That particular group, I think, angers people of our persuasion more than others because they are willing to sort of get into the intellectual fight. I think it's true also of like this modern monetary theory, and there are a few other weirder ones like Georgism and stuff like that. Like, why are people willing to do all of this studying and get into this stuff, but they're not able to apply reason? These people are not, you wouldn't call them Dionysians in the sense that we're using it. It's almost like people studying the Talmud or something, where they're just like obsessively repeating these tropes of their own ideology about, if it's Austrian school, about whatever, gold standard, and they have so many loopholes and escape clauses in their arguments and stuff. And that goes back to the issue of Plato and Aristotle, where it's the libertarians have excellent rhetoric. They've got their talking points lined up, and they've got their escapes lined up, and it's just like they're trying to do intellectual karate with you or something. But it's like, I'm not trying to have a karate match here. I'm trying to bring back industrial jobs. I'm trying to keep people in their homes, give them a better standard of living, let them send their kids to college, maybe have a vacation once in a while.
Then if the 9/11 was an inside job, researchers who were armed with so many facts what if those people could now transition I think we've exhausted that topic. Every bit of information we could find is already on the internet. I read a poll recently that 78% of the American public believes 9/11 was an inside job. If we could, yeah, that's how big, but it's like, if we could take that energy, that where we learned every nuance of thermite and at what temperature steel melts, going further and further into it was an energy weapon like Judy was. If we could take all that learning and energy toward understanding why we need a Wall Street sales tax, or why we need to nationalize the Fed, and people had talking points to go to convince their relatives. If people could go and say, Wall Street pays no tax, Wall Street extracts from the economy through flash trades. If people could go and explain that we pay taxes on everything, and Wall Street pays no tax, and this is the fairest tax, this is a progressive tax, and people could start to convince their friends and family that we need to tax Wall Street, which I think is a much easier sell than to convince somebody that 9/11 was an inside job. If I counted up all the hours that I tried to convince my parents that 9/11 was an inside job, I could get that time back now and convince them that we need to tax Wall Street. What motivates somebody to want to investigate that, but not want to investigate our economic culture?
With 9/11 in particular, I think because it was designed to be a massive shock to the psyche of the public.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a big part of what it was. It was just like, boom, in your face, 9/11 is the answer to everything forever. Now I think the reason that 9/11 truth has faded as a social phenomenon is that 9/11 is no longer used to explain anything. It's not, Obama's not saying, we got it, fireworks.
Oh, not again. Okay, keep going.
America never ends around here. It's Roman candles or something.
Okay. We're already on July 12th. Okay, keep going.
When it was George Bush, it was just like, all right, roll over Congress, 9/11. Whether it was an economic thing or whether it was war. And I think you did have that moment after the Wall Street bailout in 2009 when we could have, based on these issues, could have steamrolled a pretty big part of the American public who was desperate for answers. But right now, Occupy deflected that, and now it's, well, we're having a slow recovery. That's all you ever hear is, well, the recovery's a little bit slower than we would have liked. Yeah. Meaning it's like 200 years off.
It's like I wonder sometimes whether Occupy had a design to fail built into it because of the elite knows tools or the techniques for real revolution. It's like they pushed a revolution like this because knowing it was going to fail. And once people failed against Wall Street, once they do it once, are they going to want to restart that? A
second Occupy becomes less likely because it's like, oh, we already tried that.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I think it very well could have been.
How do you now start a mass movement again against Wall Street without it looking like, oh, we've already been here before and it didn't work? Let's set our sights on details instead of the whole enchilada.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because this whole thing clearly had the whole process of the elite creating just a bunch of little clouds of lies to sort of stick people in goes back to at least ancient Greece and probably before that. So it has been happening before, yet you're able to get the American Revolution and Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt, and you know what I mean? You're able to have these moments of tremendous gains for the common person. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we are the ones that are going to literally take power, but I think we're the ones that are going to, anybody can be among those who sort of keeps the flame alive because you never know what can happen. You know, you don't know what can happen internationally where all of a sudden, you know, if Russia and China stop trading oil and dollars, the whole world is going to change tomorrow.
Right.
And it's just going to shake up the political system to the degree that I think that's sort of the lesson of these successful revolutions, whether it's the original American Revolution or the Civil War or the New Deal, is that they happen in these moments of just great crisis and tribulation when you've got proper leaders in place to take advantage, you know, come in and gather their forces before Wall Street can sort of counterattack. You know what I mean? And it shows you that Wall Street is not, in fact, omnipotent. They don't control reality. They create the perception of their control of reality, I think, to scare people off. And that's why I get kind of pissed about this idea of closing corporate tax loopholes. I would file that under the same category as trying to shut down the Export-Import Bank. You had people like Alan Grayson, and I think Bernie Sanders was out for this too, where they were saying, yeah, this Export-Import Bank, this is crony capitalism. And because, look, Boeing is getting loan guarantees. Why would you not want Boeing to succeed?
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're big?
Yeah, and just to explain to the audience really quickly, I mean, the Export-Import Bank is our last dirigistic institution in this country, or one of the last.
Yeah, they basically insure exporting and importing of products. So, like, if Boeing is going to ship some planes to Zanzibar, they're going to have it insured through the Export-Import Bank because they are going to be able to give them some sort of political assurance through having the right diplomatic contacts and stuff of them being able to get the product delivered and for them to get paid.
We have a lot of companies we've been speaking to in Nebraska that are getting their loans insured for things like popcorn companies.
Yeah,
in Nebraska.
It's just if you're going to export popcorn to Canada, you're not going to use the Export-Import Bank. But if you're going to export it to Ukraine, you're going to need it because it's anytime you're dealing with somebody with significant economic or cultural barriers or whatever, you need some sort of a public representative to facilitate that trade.
My stepfather is an English school teacher, and my mother is, a stay-at-home mother. Neither of them, they're not industrial people who have products, you know what I mean? So I'm just trying to say that my mother and my stepdad would have no idea what the Export-Import Bank is. So I think if we could just spend a minute or two on that and describe that to the audience, I think that's very important. But a lot of people in this country are removed from making a product.
Like, to take an example, my brother is in the printing industry. He sells printing presses and related equipment. Let's say he's exporting a printing press to South America or something, to Brazil. He's going to need to get that financed in the sense that he's going to need to get paid up front so that he can buy the press from its current owner and it's a piece of used equipment or something. So he needs the capital up front to buy this press and export it to Brazil. So somebody needs to front him that capital. Let's say it's Chase Bank. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to give you a line of credit for $60,000 and it's at 6%. And he needs that money so that he can get the product. He sends it to Brazil and they're going to pay him, what they owe him for the product. And then he's going to pay Chase back plus the interest. Mm-hmm. Right? And so he wants to avoid using the Export-Import Bank. So if he's selling something to Canada, he's not going to use them because he can, if he has to, drive up to Canada and get his money back.
Okay.
But if he's selling it to Brazil or to a place, further afield or whatever, you're going to go to the Export-Import Bank and say, all right, I need to additionally get this deal insured so that basically you are going to issue me an insurance policy on this transaction. You're going to help me settle any sort of an issue that's going on. And then they're going to do that at a fairly low cost of insurance. So it's just sort of like a public service where they're going to come in and sort of validate this loan that you're getting from a private bank, and they're going to help you negotiate the legal system in Brazil if you need to. They're going to make sure to do some things to help make sure that you get paid.
What's the corruption of the people in Washington who are trying to close the Export-Import Bank?
What we've been talking about with some people is that other countries, principally China, also have export-import banks that do this exact same thing. And China's export-import bank is, I think it's 4 times the size of ours in terms of the number of trades that they finance. Mm-hmm. And why is that? Because China has a very dirigistic policy of encouraging exports. They have national industrial banks, national agricultural banks, because they're trying to basically use credit as a competitive advantage so that China can dominate export markets. And the theory is that China is then going to sort of conspire to get the U.S. Export-Import Bank down so that, back to my brother, he needs that trade facilitated to Brazil. Well, then the only place that he's going to be able to get that is the Bank of China, literally. Okay. We're going to be losing tax revenue because the Export-Import Bank returns I forget what it was a couple $2 billion every 5 years to the taxpayer. So it's a profit-making enterprise for taxpayers, but also we're going to lose that control of our own trade policy and basically sort of have to defer all of that to China, who's then just going to be built up more and more and more.
And there are new guys in Washington calling this crony capitalism.
McCarthy, not me. and Jeb Henserling, and I think John Boehner has been calling for it. But then also on the left, people like Alan Grayson and Bernie Sanders, because again, they're saying it's crony capitalism because Boeing is getting a low-cost loan through the Export-Import Bank so that they can export planes.
Yeah, so why isn't their issue the fact that zombie banks are getting 0% loans from the Federal Reserve?
Right.
Why is this their issue, that Boeing is succeeding? Why aren't they up in arms, this group, about the crony capitalism between the Federal Reserve and zombie banks on Wall Street?
Boeing isn't getting anything for free. They're getting a loan guarantee that they're paying for out of the profits of the plane that they sell. And it's sort of the same thing, even like the corporate tax loopholes, whatever. Because, I mean, if you could close all corporate tax loopholes tomorrow, that would be great. And I think the estimate is that it would be, I think Bernie Sanders says it could be like in the hundreds of billions of dollars over a decade or something like that.
Right, but if you tax Wall Street, that could be trillions a year.
Right. To look at, you can't just say that, oh my God, these guys are just stealing the money and they're just not paying taxes that they owe. They're classifying their gains in various ways so that it becomes a tax deferment. Just saying that what Boeing is doing, or what, when they say this company and that company pay no taxes, it's not as if they owe taxes that they're not paying. It's that they are abiding by the law, but, the law allows them to reclassify things in certain ways. And so instead of, I think a real issue would be get rid of the preference for capital gains and carried interest and things like that, because at some point, all of this, the money that these corporations are earning, it's going to have to be passed on to shareholders and officers and employees and stuff like that. The people at the top of the pyramid are going to classify it as capital gain. It's not Boeing is hiding its money. It's that the board of directors and the CEO and the shareholders, who are all of these, mutual funds and hedge funds and blah, blah, blah. Those are the guys making and hiding the money. So why are you not going after that kind of stuff?
I'm racking my brain how to get people involved in these issues instead of campaign finance reform, which is immediately obvious on the surface.
And it's, I don't know, when you talk about like what's the key to getting people to understand this stuff, I think the problem is, I talk to people I know who are in these businesses, so there are a zillion people in the middle who understand this stuff from daily experience, but the problem is they're not political. The people who are political are Dionysian. So I mean, if you ask the average leftist, a lot of them have been inspired by people like Noam Chomsky, and his big thing is anarcho-syndicalism, where it's like these, I think his was in Spain, but it was sort of the same thing in the Balkans, where worker-controlled factories and blah, blah, blah. Anybody who has been involved in industry is going to be able to tell you that that's crazy. And it's just clearly Noam Chomsky, he's the typical ivory tower academic. He doesn't have any experience running a factory. So, like, why does he get to even opine on this kind of stuff? And then he's got hundreds of thousands or millions of these impressionable young students saying, fuck the system. And it
was like when we were talking about getting my dad on the show to talk about being in the military after he's been in the military 30 years. You said that's a good idea. Like, I don't want Noam Chomsky's opinion on being in the military. Let's just think of Apollonian as reason and Dionysian as intuition, emotion.
Again, draw the distinction between reason as like Ayn Rand would have it versus the natural reason of Christianity or something like that, where it's ideas about the greater good and things like that, as opposed to,
well, you have a generation of out of work kids. Being a revolutionary suddenly becomes fashionable because you've got people with a lot of time on their hands. Dionysian or Aristotelian. Plato is Apollonian. That's called Aristotle Dionysian. These Aristotelians create this mythology. The elite Aristotelians create a mythology. Also, the elite is creating a mythology of activism. I look at everybody nowadays, my age, and they have on their job descriptions, they have activist, right? Or look at what they did with the masks, the V for Vendetta masks. The V for Vendetta masks. That was a mythology.
Well, and even before that, the idea that Guy Fawkes, tried to blow up the Parliament building was a mythology. He was framed. That was the original state mythology to frame somebody.
the fall guy. They're creating mythologies the revolutionaries are falling into, like the hippies. So nowadays you have this like hipster activism, and I just don't know.
Slacktivism?
How do you bring that collective back
those...
to practical politics?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you could have a separate discussion about. I would look at like Harry Potter and the Hunger Games, and even like Lord of the Rings as being important cultural weapons in the same way as 1984. You might as well have Barack Obama play the Donald Sutherland character.
Right.
That movie sounds like it was written by Alex Jones or something. It's just like this oppressive, out of control police state. And, there are all these, the trendies in the city are all flopping around and, and basically like the oppressed masses are going to rise up against the tyranny of the state.
Well, I think that's the illusion that both the left and the right fringes are falling into, and it's both it's anarchistic on both sides, and there's a reason that that's being pushed by the elite, because the elite love anarchism because that destroys the stability of the federal government, which is their only control on runaway financial power. So Alex Jones will go on his show all the time and say, I don't know why I haven't been killed yet. I could be killed at any minute. Well, because you're advocating for a form of anarchy. You're advocating for limited government, and the powers that be, whether it's the people who killed Kennedy or whatever, it was always the financial elite. So it's like...
Who got assassinated? Did Thomas Jefferson? Did Andrew Jackson? Did, I was about to say Ronald Reagan, but he almost did. But, it was Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, Roosevelt, if you want to count that, and that's a whole other discussion. William McKinley, James Garfield, possibly, who was that other guy? Warren Harding, possibly Poison. All of these guys were American system Republicans. Every last one of, Roosevelt being the Democrat.
The American system is the system
and Kennedy.
And Kennedy.
Yeah.
That's who gets killed. Alex Jones is saying, they haven't come for me yet. Well, you're playing right into their hands by saying you hate this big government. If you go to the far left and you go to the far right, what's in vogue right now is anarchy. Most of the people down at Occupy were anarchists, and then this libertarianism is a form of anarchy. I always said, the government is the greatest experiment in our human history, obviously. It's been infiltrated and it needs to be rescued, not destroyed. Why destroy the American federal government, which is, you know what I'm saying? If you think about it, just think about it over and over again. Why destroy one of the greatest systems ever invented?
Think about all of the sacrifices and the blood that was spilled to keep this thing going, and then now you're ready to chuck it out the window for what, 3D printers and...
Kyle, we're out of time for this week. Please remember to go to danfornebraska.com, where all the on-ground action is, and volunteer or donate. Here's a quick preview of next week's episode with America's most respected comedian, the genius Rick Shapiro, talking about comedians who act as revolution distractions. You've been listening to ucy.tv/UFR. Have a blessed evening.
The fact of the matter is, you better start marching, and you're really going to lose your say. In the Constitution, it says religion cannot enter the workplace. That's what it says.
Yeah.
That's what it says. So a man walks home with his son knowing it's no longer about the working man. It's no longer about it. They don't care. They do not care. It's about the working man, the man who had his job stolen.
Do you think Russell Brand cares about the working man?
That's the best cartoon image I've ever heard to think of. Are you kidding? Sits at a child's desk with his chin in his hand in his hotel suite going, the working man. My boots are pretty.
And he said, the great thing about being on benefits when I was on benefits is it allowed me to sustain my heroin habit.
Our job now as individuals in that room is to respond to what he said, even if you get thrown out. You initiate the drop of the ball. But the answer is, you're the dangerous one in a better way. Say, are you kidding? Better not fuck with the children with disorders, you lucky closet fuck. You flounce to get more work as an actor. They're just followers because that's what they're taught. the next generation of people who said, I thought Russell Brand was, I knew he was going to be the next George Carlin, but I don't know about George Carlin because he wasn't cute. He wasn't cutesy. you know, Rocky Red Road. What's his name? Brett Pants? Brett Pants?
Russell Brand.
What's his name?
Russell Brand.